In the video. Oh, the video. Yes. You didn't hear the part I talked to.
Okay. Today, this program is a joint effort. It's a partnership between the DCSRA and the A4A. It's a good partnership because, you know, we are two good organizations that share the same values. And the first program, as a joint effort, it's perfect that we're talking about education. Miriam, will you come up and make the introduction?
And the education group, which is a very, very active group in our Alliance for Action, many of their members are here today because why? Because we really care about the person who's speaking today. David Schapira is a Democrat, and I'm going to put this on, who is running for the Superintendent of Public Instruction. Now, I hope you know who that horrible person is that he's going to get out of office. Diane Douglas. Never vote for her. Tell everybody not to vote for her. We have a wonderful candidate who's going to be coming up. And I want to say to you, you know my introductions are usually really short. I am going to tell you a few things about David that he won't tell you about himself. He was, according to the Arizona Republic, recognized as a lawmaker who made a difference, an emerging leader worth watching, and one of Tempe's exemplary people, acknowledging his commitment to advocate for his community. He's earned honors from the Arizona Student Association, the Arizona Technology Council, Mothers Against Drunk Driving, American Cancer Society, League of Cities and Towns, and East Valley Tribune. And I'm sure there are more that I don't know about. He earned his master's degree in education leadership from ASU after receiving a bachelor's degree from George Washington University. Okay, those are the things I'm telling you. Now he's going to tell you all the rest.
Can you hear me in the back?
Yes.
Usually not a problem, but just checking. I have a great teacher voice. I've kept it over the years. I found a way. Teaching at the high school level, when you have 35, sometimes more, unfortunately, students in a room, it's a little bit easier. At the university level, sometimes I had 100 students at a time and no microphone. So you learn to project so the people in the back of the room can hear you. My name is David Schapira. I am an educator and a career-long public education advocate. Two things that I believe make me a great deal more qualified than our current Superintendent of Public Instruction. I started my career teaching in the Valley, up in Phoenix. I went back to my old high school to teach. How many educators first of all in the room? Raise your hand if you are or have ever been an educator. Wow, I would say more than a third at least, almost half. How many of you who had your hands in the air went back to your old high school to teach? You know what? Believe it or not, I usually find one or two crazy people like me. So I taught in a classroom where I actually took pre-calculus in high school. Did you teach in a room where you had a class? No. Did you?
Same building. Actually, I did.
Yeah. It is a unique experience to be standing up at the front every day of the class where you had a class. So I went back to my old high school to teach. I taught math. I'm a math teacher, yes. Math teacher. We're very famous and renowned, math teachers are. I had a great experience as an educator. I loved working with my students. I was a coach as well. And it was one of the best experiences of my lifetime to be able to see that eureka moment in students' eyes when they finally get something that they didn't before understand because of your facilitation of their learning process. There's nothing like it. A lot of the time it's a thankless job. And every once in a while you get that battery recharge moment, and teachers, you know what I'm talking about. You get that battery recharge moment where you feel like the rest of it has been made worth it. But I want to talk about right now is the rest of it. And teaching in Arizona, for those who've done it, they can tell you, it's a difficult thing, especially in recent years. Some of you may know that before 1990, and I'm a native. My family first came to Arizona, lived in South Tucson, and eventually moved up to the valley, to the Phoenix Valley. And before 1990 in this state, we had a really robust and high-quality education system. We had a system that was above the national average in per-student spending. Now, a lot of people in the room are amazed by that. I see shaking heads. Believe it or not, our per-student funding before 1990 was above the national average. 1990, for the first time, we went below that number, and 10 years later, in 2000, for the first time in state history, we had college attainment levels below the national average. I believe those two things are connected. Sadly, many folks at the Capitol do not share that belief. But let me just talk a little bit more about my experience as an educator. Now, I was really invested in my students' futures. I wanted every one of them to succeed. But I found very early on in my career as an educator that we didn't have the resources in many cases to make that possible. And so I did some investigating, and I wanted to learn, why was that the case? Was it my administration? Was it my school board? Or was it something higher and different that was impacting the funding that impacted the resources in my classroom? And what I learned is, it's the folks at the state level, the legislature, the governor, the superintendent, that really have the most direct impact on what happens, especially in terms of resources, in schools across our state. And so I became very frustrated by the fact that I had to dig into my own pocket, like many of my colleagues, to buy pens and pencils and paper and other school supplies, just to make sure that my kids had the basic tools needed to learn the material that I was there to teach them. A lot of my fellow educators had to do the same thing. And I'll be honest, I saw many kids fall through the cracks because of that lack of resources. Whether it was because they were stuck in the back of a room in a crowded class and they needed special attention the teacher couldn't give them because there were 37, 38, 39, 40 students in the room. Or because they didn't have breakfast that morning and they couldn't focus when they were in school. Or they couldn't afford lunch and they couldn't stay focused. Or because they didn't have the materials that they needed, because they didn't bring their notebook. Or they were too busy taking care of younger siblings to be able to get their homework done the night before. Our state failed so many of those students that I couldn't take it anymore. I do want to note, though, before I get into more of the reasons behind that I saw in my time as an educator, and I have seen, and I still work in a public school district now, I have seen so many professional educators do everything in their power, dig deep to make sure that in spite of all of that, the kids in their classroom have every chance to be successful. In 2002, I had the opportunity to run Terry Goddard's campaign for Attorney General. And I had a front row seat to seeing a pro-public education, Democratic, statewide candidate win in Arizona.
Oh, wow.
And as a clean elections candidate, nonetheless.
Wow.
And it gave me a chance to see that is possible. That a Democrat can win in Arizona. I had some other great experiences working on behalf of other candidates, working with other campaigns. And eventually in 2006, which was the first election where I was age eligible to run for the legislature, I decided to challenge the incumbent Republican in my very red district. I know the lines have changed around, but some of you can remember what it's like to live in a red district, right? I had a 10-year incumbent Republican representing me who was one of the most anti-public education voices at the state capitol. And so I decided to go up against this 10-year incumbent Republican in this red district, and I had almost everybody I knew try to talk me out of it. Family members, friends said, David, you're 26 years old, you're in a red district, this person's entrenched, there's no way you can win this election. And I ignored that discouragement, and I went around in my community and I knocked on 7,000 doors. And you'll hear a lot of campaigns stand up and say, you know, our campaign has knocked on 10,000 doors. Usually what they mean is, maybe the candidates knocked some doors, but a lot of volunteers, maybe even paid canvassers, have gone around. When I say I knocked on doors 7,000 in 2006, these knuckles knocked on 7,000 doors. My message was, my name is David Schapira, I am a teacher, and I believe that the legislature desperately needs the voice of an educator right now. And that message resonated. So much so that in November of 2006, in that red district against that 10-year incumbent Republican, I won that election by 3,000 votes. He was elected to the state house. Now, I served for 4 years in the House. I was on the Education Committee and on the Appropriations Committee. By my second term, I was actually the ranking member of the Education Committee. In fact, I was the only returning member of the Education Committee. So by default, I was the senior. At 28 years old, I was the senior Education Committee member of either party. But I was appointed as the ranking member by our leadership. Very wise decision on their part. And I had the ability to really try to influence policy. And actually, at that time, what was a relatively middle-of-the-road legislature. And then some things happened. Janet Napolitano left. Yeah. And that made a big dramatic impact on the legislature because the moderating influence of having a Democratic governor, when that goes away and you have a Republican House, Republican Senate, and Republican governor, things change, especially when that governor's Jan Brewer. Yeah. We faced some tough times. Very soon thereafter, we dove right into a deep recession. And I had a front row seat as the majority in our legislature and our governor saw fit to not just cut health care funding, as she did, she cut Medicaid for families across our state, but really decimated our public education system. Our legislature, our legislative leadership, and the governor in that time cut $2 billion out of the public education system in Arizona. Cut hundreds of millions out of the universities. And cut our community colleges to the point where Maricopa and Pima counties now get $0 from the state of Arizona. Nothing. So this was a tough era. And it got worse in 2010. In 2010, this was the worst election for progressive and Democratic candidates in state history. You'll remember this. It was a bad year, in Arizona especially. And in that election cycle, I decided to run for the state Senate. And I also wanted to run for the school board because I wanted to have as much influence on education policy in my community as I could. I recently had my first child, and I thought, you know, I need to start working more directly on the schools right here in our community. And so I ran for the school board and the legislature at the same time. For those that don't know, you can hold 2 elected offices in Arizona simultaneously, as long as one is unpaid. And although the legislature is virtually unpaid, the school board is actually unpaid. And so I was able to run for both of those offices at the same time. Out of 90 seats in the legislature, there were only 2 Democrats who won in competitive races. Myself and Eric Meyer were the only 2 who won in November of that year. I was elected to the Senate and to the school board on the same day. The very next day was a challenging day. I mean, mind you, we were licking our wounds from an election that left our Senate Democratic caucus with 9 members out of 30. This is the smallest caucus of either party in state history. And so we came together the next day at the Capitol, all of us, to meet to elect our leadership. And the person who was slated to be the next leader of our caucus was a woman named Rebecca Rios, who Bruce has had the chance to serve with as well. And Rebecca, unfortunately, in 2010, when she ran for re-election to the Senate, lost. And so the next day, we showed up at the Capitol licking our wounds, having lost our leader. And I came into that meeting wanting to turn things around, and with a vision to do so. And so I came to my 8 colleagues that have been elected. This 9-member caucus, we call ourselves the One Pizza Caucus. So we ordered a pizza. I ate half of it, they ate the other half. And everybody was full. And we came to talk about the future of our party and the future of this state, the future of progressive values in Arizona. And I walked into that meeting and I came in with a vision for how we could do that, how we could change things, how we could get our voice back and get our message out. And I was a freshman. I hadn't even been sworn into the Senate yet. I was the youngest member, the youngest person who had been elected to the Senate at 30. But I walked into that meeting and I communicated my vision to the other people in the room, and I asked them to elect me as the leader of the Democratic caucus. And on that day, I won my third election in 2 days. I'm an overcommitter. And so I became the leader of the Democratic caucus in the state Senate, making me, interestingly at that time, the highest ranking Democrat in state government. So we did everything we can to turn things around. And this was a tough era. This is immediately post SB 1070.
Yeah.
Right? So we had work to do. And the Republicans felt the same way. They thought, wow, we've got a supermajority in both chambers and a Republican governor, so they felt like they had work to do. So they ran bills far more egregious than SB 1070. They ran one bill that said that the 14th Amendment would not apply in Arizona. And if you are born on American soil but happen to be in the state of Arizona and can't prove that your parents are here legally, then you lose, you cannot get citizenship. Just in Arizona. They ran a bill to say that hospitals would have to determine the immigration status of their patients, and if the patients could not prove that they were documented, they were to detain them and report them to ICE and detain them until ICE could come to get them. They ran a bill to require school officials to determine the immigration status of the parents of every child in the school and turn them into ICE. Now, most of you haven't heard of these three bills. And I want to tell you the reason why. The reason why is because our leadership in that term, we decided that we had to do things a little bit differently. See, historically, Democratic leaders at the Capitol had sort of chosen between two MOs. One was, let's be stone throwers, and the other was, let's be bridge builders. But you have to pick one. In the distinct minority that we had at that time, we knew we couldn't afford to just be one or the other. Because if we decided to just throw stones, those three bills would have passed. Would be law today. Probably unconstitutional, so maybe not. But they would have been on the books. They would have made it. They would have made it to the governor's desk. The governor probably would have signed them. So we decided as a leadership team that we needed to get better at deciding when it was appropriate to build bridges and when we had to throw stones, when we needed to resort to throwing stones. And so we worked very hard that session to stop those three bills. Now, remember, it was a 9-member caucus against a 21-member caucus. They needed 16 votes to pass something. So we had to get 6 members of that caucus to defect, to vote with the Democrats to kill those three bills. And so we reached out to them, we built bridges, and we succeeded. And we defeated all 3 of those bills on 15-15 votes. Because we knew how to build bridges and we knew when was the right time to do it. But you also have to know how to throw stones and when. And so another experience we had during that time was Jan Brewer, now well known for expanding Medicaid. Well, first she had to cut it before she could expand it. So in a special session that year, the governor signed into law a budget revision that kicked people across this state off of Medicaid, including 98 people who were on the organ transplant list waiting for life-saving organ transplants. Now, you may remember this. This was a big news story at the time. And that was because we made it one. Transplant patients who literally would be condemned to death by her signature if those cuts were made. And we tried building bridges, and we failed. And Jan Brewer's signature condemned 98 people to death. And so it was stone throwing time. So I went on national television. I went on Anderson Cooper and Wolf Blitzer and Keith Olbermann and Ed Schultz. and I called Jan Brewer a one-person death panel. Because although the Sarah Palin fabled death panels of Obamacare never actually materialized, unless any of you have served on one of these death panels, have you? Jan Brewer literally, with the stroke of her pen, condemned 98 people to death. And so we shamed them in the first 100 days of that session into eventually restoring the funding for those transplant patients. And I would love to say that I deserve any applause for that, but I just want you to know, 5 people lost their lives in that time while we were working to get that done. So it's not enough to be able to throw stones and shame them into doing the right thing. We have to elect people who will do the right thing in the first place. Yes. So that was the first lesson I learned in the legislature, in my time in the Senate, that I want to talk about today, was knowing when to throw stones and when to build bridges. It's important for those of us who are Democrats in a state that still has a Republican leadership. It's important for us to know the distinction and to be able to do both of those things. But I want to spend most of my time here talking about the second lesson that I learned. And that is, when I was a teacher, I was under the impression, perhaps naively, that the folks at the legislature did not understand the impact the decisions they were making were having on students across our state, especially those in my classroom. I thought they were ignorant to that fact, that they were hurting students. I just thought they didn't get it. And I thought I was going to go down there, as the teacher that I am, I was going to go down there and I was going to teach them. I was going to educate them. And what I learned when I got to the Capitol is, they are not ignorant. They do understand. They get it. We have folks at the state capitol, the majority in our legislature, the governor of this state, and a superintendent of public instruction, who are working intentionally to dismantle the public education system in this state. Now, a lot of you are saying absolutely, but I want to tell you, I get some doubters out there when I say this. I get people who say, David, you're exaggerating, it's hyperbole, it's not that bad. Things aren't that bad. They're not that extreme. I just want to give you an example of how extreme it is. I served with a guy named Andy Biggs. He's now a United States Congressman. He was the Senate President. Before that, he was a rank and file member of the State House. And we served together on the Appropriations Committee, the Budget Committee. And one late night session when we were working on the budget, we had a break, and Andy and I were getting a snack and talking political philosophy and ideology, role of government. And he said words to me that I wrote down. And I've emblazoned into my memory, because I knew it would be important for me to remember exactly those words to this day. The words he said were, government should not be in the business of education. Public schools should not exist, was essentially what he was telling me. So where are they coming from? Where are these folks coming from who are advocating for these kinds of things? And it's not just Andy Biggs. It's not just, Bruce has served with a guy named Representative Mosley, who introduced a bill to end compulsory attendance in Arizona, making Arizona the only state in the union that would not require children to go to school. We all know, we've heard in recent days especially, about what the governor's office has done in terms of teacher raises. Yeah. I put that in quotation marks because it was a 1% stipend that the legislature passed last year. A one-time stipend that has to be renewed, while he's giving 20% raises to his own staff. We also have a superintendent of public instruction who went down to the Capitol this last legislative session and advocated in favor of taking money out of the public education system to put into private schools. I want to just rephrase this a little. This is the superintendent of public instruction. This is the person we've elected to lead the public education system. And she went down and advocated to take money out of the system she leads to put it into private schools. Why do these folks act this way? Where is the root of this intent to dismantle the public education system in this state? I'll tell you what it is. They believe that education is a commodity to be bought and sold, and somebody should profit. They believe, like Mitt Romney does, that you should just get as much education as you can afford. Those of us who believe differently, those of us who think that educational opportunity is a right that should be granted to every Arizona child, we have to fight back. Now let me tell you, for 23 years, it's not just that we've had Republican superintendents of public instruction. That's not our only problem. For 23 years, we've had superintendents of public instruction who have never worked a day in a school in their lives. You have to be a lawyer to be the attorney general. You have to work in mines to be the mine inspector. But anybody can be superintendent of public instruction, and we've proved that for 23 years. But that's not our biggest problem. Our biggest problem is their ideology, their philosophy, their belief that educational opportunity is not a right. It's not a guarantee. It's a commodity. We have to fight back. Continue to suffer under a regime that has implemented a school system that is the worst funded school system in the country. We have the lowest per student spending in the nation. We have the lowest median teacher salaries in the nation. And I'll tell you right now, we have a school system today that, and public educators can tell you this, people who are teaching now can tell you, we are on life support. And I'll tell you, if Diane Douglas is reelected, she will let us die. She will let the public education system die. Andy Biggs gets his wish. And the opportunity that is supposed to be guaranteed to every child in the state goes away. Now listen, I've got two little girls. I have a 5-year-old and a 7-year-old. And my 5-year-old just started kindergarten just a couple months ago. And I have the same anxiety and fear that a lot of parents in this state have right now about what the future of our school system looks like. But you know, that anxiety and fear is not enough for us to turn the system around. It's not enough for us to win this election next year. Because there's a lot of folks in this state, and you all have met some of them, who say, well, I don't have kids in school. So why would I vote for Prop 100? Why would I vote for Prop 301? Why would I support bonds and overrides? Why would I care about who runs the school system in Arizona? I want to give you a response to that you can offer up to them. First, a lot of them think that our school system is flush. Now they think that because of a very intentional scheme from the folks at the state capitol. They've underfunded our schools so substantially, but they've created all these mechanisms. Overrides, bonds, tax credits, which put those of us who are voters in the position of having to decide whether or not we're going to ensure our schools have the resources they need. And now we're at a point where even if they have all that, it's still not enough because of how much the legislature has cut on the back end. So, but they've convinced people, because every year or two in almost every community in this state, there's some issue on the ballot that puts more money in schools. And there are people out there, you've met them, who are convinced that our schools must be flush. My God, the schools are going to the ballot again? They want more money. When's it going to be enough? Have you heard this argument? Yeah. When's it going to be enough? They've put us in this position intentionally to make people feel that way. We have to tell those folks a couple things. One, we have to tell them, our public school system today, despite all of that, despite Prop 301, Prop 100, Prop 123, our school system today has $1.1 billion less than it had 9 years ago. The other thing that we have to communicate to folks who say, I don't have a kid in school, so how does it affect me? We have to help people understand that education is the #1 economic driver of a society. So, when I was in the legislature, there was a company, little company called IKEA, a multinational corporation, that wanted to build a corporate headquarters in Arizona. Not a store. They got stores. They wanted a corporate headquarters. They were going to bring thousands of high-wage, high-skilled jobs to our state. And they contemplated coming to the state. They did some investigation, and they wanted to know what our tax code looked like. They wanted to get a better sense of our weather. They heard it's hot, but they like the idea that we have 300 days of sunshine, and you don't have to scrape the sunshine off your windshield or out of the roads. And so they can stay open. We don't have earthquakes. But you can stay open year-round in Arizona, and we have, again, one of the most business-friendly tax codes in the country. And so they thought, well, this is great. These are the two things we care most about. They did a little bit more investigation and eventually decided not to come. They sent a letter to folks in the Department of Commerce and members of the legislature saying, we're not coming to Arizona. We want you to know why. We're not coming, you guessed it. Because although you have this great tax code, very business friendly, and this great weather, we cannot justify coming to a state with an education system that is as under-resourced as Arizona's is. Why? We can't guarantee we'll have a sustainable workforce for our business. We can't justify bringing families from other places that have well-resourced schools to Arizona to send their kids to under-resourced schools. We just can't do it. Do you think we're going to get Amazon? I don't care how many cacti we send them. We're not getting Amazon. And so, even for people who do not have kids in school, the education system dictates the quality of our economy. Arizona is usually first in, first out of recessions. This time around, it seems like first in, last out.
Yeah.
We are lagging behind the rest of the country because we have the worst resourced education system in the nation. And I want to give you a counterexample. I served today on the Tempe City Council. I was elected there in 2014 after I left the legislature. And the city of Tempe, for those that don't know, has the highest occupancy rate of Class A office space in the state. Meaning the very nice business office space, we don't have a bunch of vacancies. We have virtually none. 5 of the world's 10 largest financial institutions have headquarters, not branches, headquarters in the city of Tempe. Tempe has more jobs than people. Process that for a second. I'm counting kids and retirees. We have more jobs than people. Why is Tempe doing so well economically, where a lot of the rest of the state is lagging behind? Well, for the last 3 years, Tempe had 6 A-rated high schools. All 6. All 6 high schools A-rated. Kyrene Elementary School District, K-8, is the highest rated K-8 district in Arizona. Tempe Elementary School District, it's a Title I and DSEC district. For those of you that think that maybe Tempe just has a different population, it is a poor and heavily minority district, also one of the top school districts in the state. Tempe has, we have worked hard. We pass every override, we pass every bond, and our city is very involved in our education system. It was my baby when I first came on the council to introduce a free preschool program in the city of Tempe for low-income families in partnership with our local school districts. And we got it passed just this last year, and in August, we opened the very first free preschool classrooms in a city, provided by a city in the state of Arizona. We have 360 kids below 200% of the federal poverty level that would not have had access to preschool, who now do in the city of Tempe. That kind of investment in education in our community is what has driven our economic recovery in the city of Tempe. We need that kind of investment in this state. The entire state. When I was in the legislature, I would commonly hear some of my Republican colleagues, Russell Pierce and Andy Biggs and John Kavanaugh and others, whenever I would talk about the need for us to provide economic mobility, for us to invest in schools, for us to help every kid in every corner of this state have access to quality education, for kids to have health care when they wanted to cut our kids' care program. The response I would get, I can almost set my watch by it, from these folks in the legislature consistently, a saying you've all heard, was, you know, these poor families, they just got to pull themselves up by their bootstraps, like the rest of us have done.
Yeah, right.
My response to them and my message in this campaign, and when I get into that superintendent's office, my mantra at the state capitol will be that education is the bootstrap by which we pull ourselves up. Path to class mobility. It's the path to the American dream. We didn't ask in that poem at the base of the Statue of Liberty for people to give us their tired and poor so that they could get here and still be tired and poor. The implied promise in that poem is that we will provide the opportunity for people who come to our shores to live the American dream. And we are stealing that from a generation of children because of our lack of investment in our public schools. So how do we turn things around? How can I do that as superintendent? I don't even get a vote in the budget. I had more say on the appropriations committee in the budget process than I will if I win this position. So why am I running for this position? I think the Superintendent of Public Instruction has 2 primary responsibilities. Operate the Department of Education, which is a big job. 800 people serving school districts across the state. Right now, they don't really serve the school districts. They just create mandates and expect the districts to meet them. But we should actually be providing services to school districts, helping them to meet the standards that we require. But the other responsibility is the Superintendent of Public Instruction should be the chief advocate for public schools at the state capitol. And as the public school system's chief advocate, when I'm sworn in January of 2019, I will go down to the Capitol and I'll meet with my former colleagues. I know pretty much every member of the legislature. I'll meet with the governor's office about trying to invest again in public schools. And we can do this in a way that makes far more sense than what we've done. Let me first say, sales tax is the worst way to fund schools. But it's how we've been doing it now for a while, ever since Prop 301, which I'm thankful for Prop 301, because without it, my first year teaching, I would have made $24,000 instead of $30,000. But sales tax is the worst way to fund schools. It is the most regressive revenue source we have. It most disproportionately impacts poor people. And it is the most volatile revenue source we have. So when we go into a recession, the collections plummet, which means our schools suffer. I want to fund schools in a more sustainable and less regressive way. Income tax, property tax. But we also have $8 billion of tax loopholes in this state. If we closed a quarter of those, instead of being in a $1 billion hole from where we were 9 years ago, we'd have $1 billion more in our school system today than we had 9 years ago. I will make this case at the Capitol on day one. But listen, I'm not delusional. I don't think that all of a sudden they're going to lay down their arms and decide that they don't want to dismantle public schools anymore. I hope that we have a more democratic legislature. I hope we have a democratic governor. But let's say they retain a chamber or both or the governor's office. We're not going to be able to just convince them out of the kindness of their hearts, because we haven't been able to do it for decades, to adequately fund our public school system. But I'll work at it my first session and in that second session. So my first 14 months in office, I will spend time down at the Capitol working with the governor, working with the legislature, to try and budget an adequate amount of funding to support our kids in this state. But if I fail in that first 14 months, in March of 2020, I'm not going to just hold a press conference and say, hey, the legislature didn't do what I want, we need more money in schools, somebody take care of that. I will launch and lead the campaign to go to the ballot in 2020 with an initiative that will take away the authority from the legislature to decide how schools are funded. Yeah. In Arizona, we have a little something called the Voter Protection Act, which gives us as voters the right to go to the ballot and to pass legislation that the legislature cannot change or undo unless they get 3/4 of the vote in both chambers and further the intent of the law. So if they prove to us in my first 14 months in office that they are unwilling to provide the resources that we need to educate our kids and provide them with the opportunity to live the American dream, we will go to the ballot in 2020 and we will take away their authority. And the voters will finally take back the education system in this state. It's what has to be done. It's what has to be done. Things like private school vouchers, this is not the solution. We're having the wrong conversations. When 85% of families are choosing traditional public schools, that's what we should be focused on. That's what we should be focused on. Saying that we're going to solve a teacher shortage by eliminating the standards to become a teacher and saying that anybody with a pulse can now teach in this state, that is exacerbating the problem, not solving it. Because those of us who went to school to study to be educators, we are offended by that legislation, and many of my colleagues have left the profession because they refuse to work in education in a state where a legislature undervalues teachers as much as this legislature does. So we need to pass the right policies that are going to help our kids succeed. And so I will be an advocate every day down at the Capitol to make sure that that happens as well. I need your help to do all this. Listen, David Garcia lost this election by 1% in 2014. 1%. He won Maricopa County and lost the election. Something almost no Democratic candidate has ever done. We have to run a better campaign this time, and I'll tell you, I'm an educator by profession. My bachelor's degree, though, is in political science, and I taught the course on campaigns and elections at ASU for 5 years. So I have done an analysis of that election in 2014, and I can tell you on the precinct level where we lost and where we need to win this next time. And so I'm spending time in every corner of this state, not just because it will help me win the election, but because families and kids and teachers in every corner of this state, they need to know that the next superintendent of public instruction is not just going to represent the great state of Maricopa. The next superintendent is going to represent every kid and every teacher, in every classroom, in every school, in every corner of this state. And so, by doing that, by helping people understand that that's the kind of superintendent I'll be, we can make up that 1% difference. By the way, I think 2018 will be a better election for us than 2014 was. Diane Douglas was unknown in 2014. She's known now. People know who she is. And I was telling some folks earlier, she has the worst favorability rating of any statewide elected official, for those of you who've been here for a while, since Ev Meekum, post-impeachment. Her favorability, according to Republican polls, which had her worse than my poll had her, is 15% favorable and 47% unfavorable. We can win this election, but I need your help to do it. Now, we were talking earlier about my campaign strategy. We've got a lot to accomplish over the next year before this election comes about. We have to collect signatures from 5,300 people to get on the ballot. I'm running as a clean elections candidate. We can raise seed money to help us get started. The limit for that is $28,000. We also have to collect the $5 contributions in order to qualify for clean elections so that we get funding from the state. I choose to forego the special interest money, and I run as a clean candidate. I've always done it. Every race I ran for the legislature, I'm going to do it this race too. And our plan was to try and get the first two things done by the end of this year, and hopefully to get the fives early in the election cycle, early next year, so that we can get our funding. So the 5,300 signatures we need to get on the ballot, we circulated our petition today, and I appreciate those of you who signed. I want you to know, though, today we have about 6,500 signatures. Because the enthusiasm across the state right now for what we're trying to do in this campaign is high. I would love to circulate our donation envelopes and ask you to contribute to my seed money fund, but I can't, because we've already reached the limit of $28,000 that we can raise. If everybody in this room, I was telling folks earlier that we would exceed this lower threshold, but seeing how many people are here, if everybody in this room gives a $5 contribution today, $5 cash, $5 check, we've got a laptop where you can do the credit card. If everybody in this room does that today, we will be probably just 100 $5 contributions away from 1,500. And as soon as we do that, we can get our funding from the state, and that is huge. That allows us to really launch our campaign. So, listen, I'm taking a lot of your time today. I hope that you share my vision for the future of education in this state. I hope that you believe me when I tell you I am committed to winning this race next November, because it is so unbelievably critical for the students that I serve today as a school administrator, and for my two kids, and for the kids of every parent in this state. It is so critical to the economic future of our state that we have to end this 23-year-long streak at the superintendent's office. I need your help to do that. Thank you very much. And again, one more thing before I jump into questions. I really want to thank Miriam. We met at an LD2 event months ago and talked about this day back then, and I'm glad we were able to make it happen. And thank you for inviting me, and for both groups for bringing me here to be able to. Thank you.
10 years.
This is my dream job. You know, to run the education system in this state, to turn things around for my kids and all kids, that really is my priority right now. We desperately need somebody in this office who knows what they're doing and who has their heart in the right place and who actually has the ability to do things. Any other questions I can answer? Yes, ma'am.
You stated, and I hope my memory is correct, that in 2017, the budget for education is, did you say 1 billion less than it was 10 years ago?
Yeah, 9 years ago. So
9 years
yeah,
ago.
so
But my question
yeah.
is, what about the student numbers?
Yeah.
Did they go down?
No.
They go up?
We had
Stimulus money?
we had approximately 1.1 million students in the school system 9 years ago. We have approximately 1.1 million today. And what that $1 billion represents, that's $1,000 less per kid in that 9-year period. Now, of course, it's adjusting for inflation, which you have to do, because the dollar doesn't go as far today. We haven't had that much inflation in the last 9 years. But yes, $1.1 billion. Ma'am, you had a question, or did you have a question? So if you look at the $5 contribution form, at the bottom it says David Schapira for superintendent. That's the spelling and everything. That's who you make it out to. David Schapira for superintendent. Other questions?
No, that was it.
That was your question? Any other questions I can answer?
Thank you.
Did you have one?
We can take this and just take a check and maybe.
Yeah, if you don't have check or cash with you today, and you don't want to do the credit card on the laptop, you can mail it to that address that's at the bottom of the form. Yes, ma'am. Oh, Kaylin, are we out of forms? Okay, they're coming to you.
Good.
Other questions? Any questions about what's going on in education policy? I would also love to hear if you have unique stories about what's going on in the school system that you're more familiar with. There are a lot of educators here. Yeah.
What's the status of the ethics studies? The Supreme Court makes that
So the question was, what's the status of the ethnic studies prohibition? So I was the ranking member of the Education Committee in the House from 2009 to 2010 when Steve Montenegro was elected to the legislature and ran the bill to ban the teaching of ethnic studies in Arizona, targeting, of course, Tucson. And I was as the ranking member, I was the chief opposition. Caleb. I was the chief opposition, the point person to stop that ethnic studies ban at the Capitol. And unfortunately, the Republicans had a majority. They passed it on a partisan vote, and the ethnic studies ban is in fact law in Arizona right now. It's been challenged in court. Our challenge so far has not been successful. So technically right now it is law in the state of Arizona. Can I tell you do you guys have time for a quick funny story about that? Educational, informative story. Y'all remember Tom Horn was the superintendent of public instruction, right? So how many of you have heard of IB programs, International Baccalaureate programs? Okay, so these are advanced programs that are at the high school level in Arizona. I ran a bill to provide incentives and funding for schools to be able to launch IB programs, and I tailored it to IB programs by saying that the program had to include a foreign language component, a volunteer service component, and a philosophy component, because they have a philosophy class that's part of IB called Theory of Knowledge. I ran this bill, and Tom Horn came into the committee. This is the year ethnic studies ban passed, and Tom Horn came to the committee and he said, "You guys don't pass this bill. This is a terrible bill," even though he's a supporter of IB. He said, "Don't pass the bill because philosophy could be interpreted to mean ethnic studies." Our superintendent of public instruction thought that philosophy was the same thing as ethnic studies. So I created an amendment to the bill to appease Tom Horn. And the amendment struck the word philosophy and replaced it with logic, argument, and epistemology. So I ran this amendment to the bill, and I sent it over to Tom Horn's office, and they sent something back saying, "Oh yeah, we're good to go." And I walked into the hearing, and there's Tom Horn in the back of the room, and I took him out in the hallway with his staffer I had sent it to, and I said, "You guys have seen the amendment?" He said, "Yeah." I said, You saw that we changed it to logic, argument, and epistemology away from philosophy, because I know you're concerned about that." He said, "Oh yeah, we saw it." I said, "You guys are okay?" He says, "Yeah, we're okay, fine. Pass the amendment." I said, "Superintendent, do you know what epistemology means?" He said, "No, I don't." I said, "It means ethnic studies." His jaw dropped. His staffer's jaw dropped twice as far because I had sent it to him. And I said, "Just kidding, it means study of knowledge." But it's good to know. It's good to know that you just wanted to make a political point, dinging ethnic studies in a bill that had nothing to do with ethnic studies, and that you truly didn't care about what the impact of the bill is. That's the kind of superintendents we've had in recent years, and that's just another reason we got to end that era.